Okay, let's call ourselves to order. This is going to be week number 12, our 12th session together. I try to stay outside and greet everybody as long as I possibly can before coming in. And I hope all of you that are now coming in that I didn't get to greet have checked yourself off on the list so we can kind of keep up with everybody. Because it's good to be able to get to know one another and be part of this together. I'm continually reminded that we have people that we have no idea who they are or where they are that are watching the videos that we've taught here at the church that are now online. And I thought it would be kind of fun to start tonight, since I've greeted most of you on your way in. If these people that may be watching sometime on the internet, and if it stays on the internet for a long time, there'll always be new people, but it'll let those people know that we are aware that they're there, and that because of this group that's in this room, there's a reason to come and teach that allows people around the globe to get to be part of this as well. So I thought we ought to welcome Michael from San Diego with us this evening, Brandon from Chickasha, Suzanne from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Adam from Cape Coral, Florida, Charles in Vancouver, Brian in Delano, Minnesota, Ray in Kingman, Arizona, Matthew in Whitesboro, New York, Harold in Osis, California, James in Winnipeg, Canada, Cameron in Australia, Roxanne in Sweden, Janet in Oklahoma City, Myrna from Franklin, Tennessee, Blanchard in Sunnyvale, Texas, Kelvin in the Woodlands in Texas, Augustine in Poolsbo, state of Washington, John in Mercer, Pennsylvania, Krista in Ohio, Steve in Fort Laramie, Wyoming, Timothy here somewhere in Oklahoma City, and today Michael in Salzburg, Austria contacted us about watching the videos. So all of those people, welcome. All of those that we've not yet met. And if you'll, let's do that. So we're a much bigger class, and we're a huge class as we are here. And if those that are watching would ever send us an email to Ezra@stelijahokc.com. It just is fun for us to know that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. And here we are, it's dark on this December evening, the weather gets colder, and we're not sure whether we're going to make it or not. And it's kind of fun to come and realize people around the globe are part of this as well, and it's encouraging to come. So we start tonight then on our week 12 together. We're going to finish up the 4th chapter of the Gospel of John, and we should be able to start and get into the 5th chapter this evening then. So let us begin. And if people are watching this over the internet, we are following a 750-page volume 1 in the Gospel of John. And if someone will contact us, we'll give you the details about how we can possibly get one in your hands. It's a little hard to ship things overseas. It's so expensive. But we are able to ship, at least in the continental North America. Okay, with John chapter 4, verse 46, we start. Chapter 20 in your book, In Need of Signs and Wonders. Chapter 20, In Need of Signs and Wonders. I don't know what page that is. 301. Now after the 2 days, he, Jesus, departed from there. We're in Samaria, remember? The lady at the well. And he went to Galilee, for Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they also had gone to the feast. So Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum, as Father Constantine would pronounce it. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and implored him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Then Jesus said to him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe." The nobleman said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your son lives." So the man believed the word Jesus spoke to him, and he went on his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, "Your son lives." Then he inquired of them the hour when he got better, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives." And he himself believed, and his whole household. This again is the second sign Jesus did when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. You will recall that we are in the first half, that which we are calling the book of earthly things, that many in the biblical community have always called the first half as the book of signs, because it puts an emphasis upon signs. A prophet without honor. Now the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics, record a different versions of a prophet having no honor in his own country. In Mark 6:4, but Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own country, among his own relatives, and in his own house." Matthew 13:57, so they were offended at him, but Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own country and in his own house." Then Luke chapter 4, verse 24, then he said, "Assuredly, I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country." The Jewish rejection of Jesus remained an agonizing mystery. That non-Jews accepted and believed in Jesus, while his own people not only had requested his execution, but still rejected him, was a reality for John and his Mystagogic class 60 years after the crucifixion. There was the mystery that the Jews had rejected Christ in the first place, and that 60 years later, they still rejected him. The conversion of non-Jews to Christianity. Rome saw Christianity as a Jewish sect, as we learned in our opening chapters. It brought the wrath of Rome down on all Jews, since one of the conditions for the Jews having freedom of worship was the prohibition against Jews making converts of non-Jews. In an act of self-preservation, the Jews expelled all other Jews that were confessing Jesus to be the Christ from the synagogues. In this way, only law-abiding Jews, law-abiding, obeying Rome, remained on the synagogue's membership rolls. The rejection by the Jews in 30 AD resulted in the death of Jesus. The rejection of Jesus as the Christ by the Jews in 90 AD likewise exposed Christians to being tortured and killed by the Romans. The rejection of Jesus by the Jews was therefore not an academic question. The rejection of Jesus by the Jews in 90 AD was an existential question. The Jewish rejection of Christ placed all believers in Jesus, whether they were Jewish or non-Jewish, at risk. In the Synoptics, the prophet without honor remarks occur after Jesus is rejected in his hometown of Nazareth. In John's Gospel, it is not Nazareth, but the Jewish nation that has rejected Jesus. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. Jesus was a prophet without honor among his own people, the Jews. The implication, of course, is that a prophet has honor everywhere except from his own people. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. The rejection of the Jews was understandable in terms of a prophet having no honor among his own people. And the acceptance by the non-Jews was understandable because a prophet had honor among those not of his own. Well, in need of signs and wonders. At first glance, 445 that we just read, I should have kept my finger on it, I guess. 445. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they had gone to the feast. At first glance, verse 45 seems a contradiction of Jesus not being held in honor. The Galileans welcomed him. So when he came to Galilee, I had it repleted, oh goodness. The Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast. So let us turn aside and consider, if they received him, how come John is telling us a prophet is not without honor except among his own people? In the Gospel of John, once the introductory scenes relating to baptism and Eucharist are given, remember in the wedding in Cana and so forth, John begins then with the confrontation between Jesus and the temple at the beginning of Holy Week when we were in chapter 2 of John. Verse 445, therefore refers to that visit to Jerusalem that we found in John chapter 2, and I've got it quoted for you in your text then, 2:23. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, during the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself to them because he knew all, is actually what it says. Men is in italicized meaning. In English, we've added the word to try to make sense of it. But because Jesus knew all, knew everything, and had no need that anyone should testify of men, for he knew what was in man. Jesus does not accept or endorse the cheap and shallow belief based on signs and wonders. He does not commit himself to them. On the one hand, he does not trust the depth of their sincerity. He knew they would treat him like the prodigal son whose friends abandoned him when the money ran out. On a deeper level, Jesus does not give himself to superficial believers. They look for signs and wonders and do not see him. They only want what he has to give, as long as what he gives are signs and wonders. They do not know he is the gift. They do not want him. They want signs and wonders. He does not give them himself because it is not him they desire. He does not commit himself to them. Therefore, Jesus' response to the royal official is a response to the crowd. Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. So he's talking to this Galilean crowd that had been at the feast and had seen some miracles take place, and now they're chasing after him that he's come to their own region, so they're looking for signs and wonders yet again. Instead, John takes us in then to real faith. John chapter 2 ends with a critical estimation of cheap and shallow belief based on signs and wonders. John now follows this criticism of belief based on signs and wonders with the story of Nicodemus in chapter 3, who comes to Jesus because of the signs and wonders, and he told Jesus, no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. So the signs and wonders will attract a crowd. Jesus then, in chapter 3, leads Nicodemus from the shallow waters of cheap belief into the deep waters of being begotten from above, into the deep waters of seeing and entering the kingdom of God. In chapter 4, John again reminds his mystagogic class of the cheap belief of signs and wonders that is then followed by a nobleman coming to Jesus for help for his son who is dying. Like Nicodemus, the nobleman comes because he has heard of the signs and wonders. But unlike Nicodemus, the nobleman moves beyond shallow belief of signs and wonders into the deep waters of real faith. The man's child is deathly sick. He has traveled from Capernaum, the father, to ask Jesus to come. There is urgency in his voice. Come before my child dies. Jesus immediately tells the father, go home, your son lives. The father believed Jesus and went home. Now, there are 3 accounts of Jesus healing a child that, while different, share so many similarities that we suspect that they are 3 different versions of the same event. Now, they may not be, but they're awfully similar. In Mark chapter 5:21, the father is Jairus, a leader of the synagogue. The child is a daughter. The father asked Jesus to come heal his critically ill daughter, and Jesus goes with the father. On the way, they are interrupted by the healing of the woman with the issue of blood. Finally, they arrive to find the daughter has died. Jesus takes her by the hand and tells her to arise, and he raises her from the dead. Matthew's version in chapter 9, verse 18, the father is a ruler, the child is a daughter. The father tells Jesus his daughter has just died. The father asks Jesus to come and bring her back to life. Jesus goes with the father, and on the way they are interrupted by the healing of the woman with the issue of blood. Finally, they arrive, and Jesus takes her by the hand and raises her from the dead. Now here in John chapter 4, verse 46, the father is a nobleman, the child is a son. The father asked Jesus to come and heal his critically ill child. Jesus tells the father to go home, that his son is alive and well. The father departs believing that his son has been healed. On the way home, servants interrupt the father, telling him his son is alive. The father learns the son was healed at the same time Jesus had told him to go home, that his son had been healed. In John's version, The shallow belief based on signs and wonders of the people is contrasted with the genuine belief of the nobleman. There was no visual healing to be witnessed and seen as a sign and wonder by the crowd. The father believes by going home. This is an example of the genuine faith that John spoke of when he reminded us that Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness that we looked at in chapter 3. Those who went to the snake on the pole would be healed. It was not enough to believe the statement that you would be healed. No one was healed for only believing the statement. Believing meant going to the snake on the pole. The nobleman believed with his feet. He went home. He didn't object. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He went home. Believing was not one thing, and going home another. Going home was believing. And then the second sign. John 4:54, this again is the second sign Jesus did when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. The Jews sought signs to authenticate and prove who someone was. John is challenging such a belief as shallow. Real signs are indicators. They point to something, like a sign points to something. They do not point to themselves. They do not prove anything. Like the burning bush, signs cause us to turn aside and enter into a revelation. This is now the second time John has put a flashing light, as it were, beside an event. You see, it's like John, here it is, he's just told the son, and now he says, this is a sign, don't miss it. He's got a flashing red light right here, right now, going, don't hurry away from here yet. Get what we're talking about. It was a sign to us. Turn aside and get what John is wanting us to see, to allow to be revealed in this event. He is signaling for us not to settle for the surface details of the story. Like an asterisk placed in the margin, it signals for us to be attentive for that which is invisibly present and being revealed in this event. The Father went home, and the people didn't get to see any sign or wonder, and what has been revealed to us is what real faith is all about, rather than chasing signs and wonders. Now, we're now moving into chapter 5, and this is a conclusion, if you will, to John's letting the Jews know how shallow their chasing after signs and wonders is. Chasing from one miracle to the next really is. And so we come now to chapter 5 of the Gospel of John, in chapter 21 in our book. And we're now going to enter into a second set of what I'm calling flashbacks, because we're inside Holy Week, if you remember. We've already been to the cleansing of the temple at the first, and now we're having flashbacks to the conflict between Jesus and Judaism that's going to end up in his crucifixion at the end of the week. And these flashbacks that we're now going to be looking at comprise a chunk of the first half of the Gospel of John. We're going to now deal with Jesus and the Sabbath, the confrontation between Jesus and the Sabbath. This will be followed by the confrontation of Jesus and Passover. Then we're going to come to the confrontation of Jesus with the Feast of Tabernacles. Then there will be an extended time of dealing with the aftermath of Tabernacles. And then we'll come to Jesus and the Feast of Hanukkah. The first set of flashbacks that we dealt with up through chapter 4 dealt with the issue of signs versus faith. Faith in signs themselves, or real faith by receiving the mystery to which the signs pointed. Beginning in chapter 5, John gives us an extended series of flashbacks which take up John's main theme so dramatically demonstrated in chapter 2, the confrontation in the temple. The second set of flashbacks is the heart of the confrontation between Jesus and Judaism. It is this confrontation, invisibly present to the disciples in the beginning, which now visibly existed in the confrontation between the church. It was invisible at first with Jesus and the disciples. 60 years later, with the invention by the rabbis of rabbinic Judaism, that conflict has now hardened itself and is now becoming visible to John's congregation in 90 AD. And it's now resulting in the martyrdom of Christians by the Romans at the very time John is writing his gospel to his class and to us. So the second set of flashbacks, number 1, Jesus and the Sabbath. Let me read some verses here. Wow. Out of John chapter 5, verse 1. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him who was cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed." He answered them, "He who made me well said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" Then they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. Afterwards Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Now the 5th chapter contains 2 parts, an event and an extended commentary. We've just read the event. Let us consider the event. So we're going to now just have some comments about the event, and then we will begin to look at the extended commentary that's going to come in the 5th chapter. Do you want to be made well? After John has set the scene for us, Jesus arrives and fully grasps the significance of what he sees. Jesus looks at the paralytic and asks a startling question. Do you want to be made well? When we look at the scene, we see a paralytic in need of healing. That's what we see. The need is so obvious to us that no one needs to ask such a rhetorical question. that Jesus does ask should cause us to reconsider what we do not see that Jesus saw. We see it, why ask? But the fact that Jesus does ask, I wonder what's going on here. The man has been paralyzed for 38 years. It is unclear how many of those 38 years have been spent waiting by this pool, waiting for the water to bubble, waiting to be healed. There are, however, many layers of understanding to be discovered in the story of the healing of the paralytic. In one layer, the paralytic represents the ancient Israelites who refused to enter the promised land. Their unbelief cost them 40 years of wandering in the desert. Out of the book of Numbers, chapter 14, according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my fierce anger. 38 years later, according to the book of Deuteronomy, after all those who had refused to enter had died, the ancient Israelites once again began moving towards the land of promise. I take him for granted you know the story. They left Egypt, they've been to Sinai, they come to the promised land, and the people were afraid to enter and balked and refused to go. And so God says, I will punish you. Your spies were in the land for 40 days, and so now you're going to pay 40 years of wandering aimlessly in this wilderness until every one of you of this generation has died out, and it'll be a brand new generation that I will then take into Palestine, the land of promise. And it says then in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 2, at that time, when we now come, they come to, we took to come from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed over the valley of the Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war was consumed from the midst of the camp, just as the Lord had sworn to them. It took 38 years, and then the last two was getting ready to go into the promised land. But it was 38 years it all died out. The 38 years of paralysis of the man in our chapter 5 is a reminder of the 40-year penalty for unbelief that cost ancient Israel an entire generation. John is writing in 90 A.D. Looking backwards, it had been 40 years after the crucifixion and the resurrection in 30 A.D., to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. Here it is, 90 A.D., and you look back, the crucifixion was in 30, 40 years after that, bingo, Jerusalem is going to be wiped out and destroyed. The Jewish revolt against the Romans cost the Jews 1,337,490 killed before the siege of Jerusalem itself. The siege and destruction of Jerusalem cost an additional 1.1 million Jews killed. Even as the unbelief of ancient Israel cost them an entire generation over 40 years, so also had the unbelief of the Jews and their rejection and crucifixion of Jesus 40 years later cost the Jews 2.4 million dead at the hand of the Romans. The warning for the man to sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you, takes on new significance when seen as a warning to Judaism as a whole. The consequences of living in the world of death are inbuilt in the world of death, the same as the wham is inbuilt in a mouse trap. Small children warned to leave a mousetrap alone may ignore the warning and touch the trap. Wham! The pain in their fingers does not come because their parents who warned them slapped their fingers in punishment for their disobedience for touching the trap. The wham comes from the trap. The pain does not come as a punishment for disobedience. The pain comes for not believing the warning. Parents do not threaten to punish their children if they disobey and touch the mousetrap. Parents warn their children of the danger existing within the trap. Their warning is intended to spare their children from being hurt. God has come to rescue mankind from the world of death, in which the consequences of death are inbuilt. The sin is in the sin of ignoring the opportunity to believe, to go to the pole and be rescued from the world of death. We are not sinners in the hands of an angry God. We are sinners dying in a world of death that a loving God has come to rescue. God never vetoes our free will. Jesus does not heal the paralytic because he thinks the paralytic needs healed. He respects the dignity of the paralytic. He does not heal the paralytic in spite of himself. He does not patronizingly know what is best for the paralytic, obviously not smart enough to figure it out for himself. He asks the man if he wants to be made well. Jesus came to his own, offering them rescue, and they rejected him. Jesus chose to die rather than impose his will on humanity. Let me just stop there and make sure you're getting it. The ancient Israelites have been exited out of the slavery in Egypt. They refused to go into the land where God was taking them. And it cost them 40 years of death, and the death of an entire generation before they then had a chance to enter into the promised land again. John, with this man being ill 38 years, is reminding the Jews of his generation who would have known the story that we have to be reminded of, that when they refused to go in, it cost them a generation over the next 40 years. And he is reminding them, as it were, that your refusal to receive salvation, your refusal to be rescued by God when he came over the next 40 years has cost you 2.4 million of your own people. And now the gospel is being preached to you again and again and again since 70 AD for the last 20 years, and you at your own peril are refusing to believe that God has come to rescue you. And that's what he is saying figuratively to the man, that Christ is saying to him, do not sin lest something worse befall you. The rescue has come. Now don't mess it up. Receive the opportunity. Now let me go on where we were. That kind of summarized that for us. Jesus chose to die rather than impose his will on humanity. St. Isaac the Syrian says that God is so great in love that he does not want to infringe upon our freedom, even when our freedom rebels against him. God did not force salvation upon the Jews. Likewise, he did not punish the Jews for rejecting him. The freedom God gives to man is absolute. If we can't say no, then saying yes really means nothing. If we say yes out of fear of punishment, if we say no, if I say no, I'm going to get punished, so I have to say yes. If we say yes out of fear of punishment, if we say no, then God secures our yes by extortion. It is with the freedom of our own will that we choose to step out of the world of death and accept the opportunity to begin living in the world of life now. We cannot threaten somebody else with God's punishment to try to get them to say yes to God. We are not sinners in the hands of an angry God. We are sinners dying in a world of death, and our loving God has come to rescue us out of the death we're in. Another layer in this story acknowledges the faithfulness of the paralytic. Even after 38 years of paralysis, he faithfully waits by the pool, hoping somehow to get in the water first and be healed. However, what he is doing is waiting for his expectation to be fulfilled. He has a script, a blueprint, an expectation of what must occur. That is, how his healing will happen. He believes his healing can only occur in such and such a way. You know, an angel must come, the water must bubble, and then I got to be the first to step into the water, and when all of that happens, I'll be healed. His expectation creates a self-crippling paralysis of inactivity. Jesus does not offer to help fulfill the paralytic's expectation. The paralytic's frame of reference created a conceptual viewpoint that defined the expectation of how his healing would come. By asking the man if he wanted to be healed, Jesus reframed the circumstance and offered an alternative understanding from which to view reality. This is a little deep, I know. To reframe means to change the conceptual and or emotional setting or viewpoint in relation to which a situation is experienced, and to place it in another frame of reference, another frame which fits the facts of the same concrete situation quite well or even better, and thereby changes its entire meaning. You can be in one situation and you can see it as only one way of understanding it, and the only way you think there's any help is for someone to come in and move piece A to piece B, like checkers in a chess game, checkers playing checkers, or pieces in a chessboard. And God comes in and says, well, what if we turned it sideways and did this? What if you completely looked at this from an entirely different angle and you saw something you've never seen before that begins to happen inside of this? In order to be healed, the paralytic had to step out of the frame of his expectation that defined his situation into the reframed point of view offered by Jesus. To use a different metaphor, the world of death is a paradigm, an accepted frame of reference that looks at the world in a certain way and offers explanations that explains how the world works the way it does. In fact, the paradigm we're born into, this world of death, says it's not death at all. This is life. This is as good as it gets. This is it. Eat, drink, and be merry. This is wonderful. This is how it is. Now, let me hurry through this next part. You can read it on your own. I want you to, Thomas Kuhn, in his Structure of Scientific Revolutions, discusses the nature of scientific paradigms and the clash between competing ones when a new paradigm replaces a prior one. When you replace that the world is flat and the center of the universe and the sun goes around the earth, when you replace that frame of looking at the world and say, no, we're in a solar system and the earth is going around the sun, completely redefined the way to look at everything. That's a shift from one paradigm of understanding to a second one. He called the replacement of one paradigm by another a paradigm shift. You've probably heard that phrase before. This is the guy that invented the term when he's analyzing what happens in science. Kuhn's analysis of paradigms and paradigm shifts regarding revolutions in science is equally applicable to religion. Let us address only Judaism and Christianity. Judaism is a religious paradigm that shared much in common with the larger paradigm of the pagan world within which it was practiced. The distinctive factor separating Judaism from paganism was Judaism's insistence in worshiping only one God. Monotheism insists that only a single deity is worthy of worship for the simple reason that only a single deity exists. Judaism as a paradigm is a closed system. It works on issues within itself, not on issues outside itself. It offers a specific perspective from which to approach the questions of life and offers specific answers and solutions to those questions. If I may paraphrase Kuhn, in its normal state, a religious community solves the problems or questions that its paradigm defines. The Jewish paradigm is the one created by Moses. Ancient Israel and Judaism live and approach life from within the perspective of the Mosaic paradigm. Jesus is a total shock to the Mosaic paradigm. He is more radical to Judaism than Copernicus was to the world for thousands of years, believed the earth was the center of the universe. Jesus offered a new paradigm, a new wine in a new wineskin. Jesus did not offer a revision of Judaism. He offered a reconstruction of the field from new fundamentals, a reconstruction that changes some of the field's most elementary theoretical generalizations, as well as many of its paradigms, methods, and applications. He changed everything. You tell me what the resurrection does if it doesn't change everything. For example, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Jesus handles the same bundle of data as before, but placing them in a new system of relations with one another by giving them an entirely different framework. The world is filled with man-made paradigms. Every human paradigm is a paradigm created within the world of death. Jesus does not revise any paradigm that functions within the world of death, within this paradigm of death. The paradigm that Jesus offers is the complete contradiction to the paradigm of death. Jesus offers the paradigm of life. I have come that you might have life and have it abundantly. Judaism rejected Jesus because he did not fit within the Mosaic paradigm. The uncontainable God would not fit inside their box, inside their framework, inside their Mosaic paradigm. They chose their paradigm over God. That is, they chose the Mosaic paradigm over Christ's paradigm. The paralytic represents mankind in general and Judaism in particular. We miss out on God because he does not come to us as expected. What if the paralytic had looked at Jesus when Jesus said, do you want to get well? And when Jesus tells him to take up your bed and walk, and he says, no, thank you, I'm going to wait till the water bubbles. I'm going to hang on to the way it has to be done, because that's how I was taught by somebody a long time ago. We miss out on God because He does not come to us as expected. After all, everyone knows that nothing good can come from Nazareth. We miss out on God because God doesn't fit our blueprint, our frame of reference for understanding reality that's created our expectation of how God will act, must act, because this is how He has to do it. If God is going to act in my life, then He's got to do it this way. With the healing of the paralytic, John begins addressing the issue of the Jewish rejection of Jesus. The Jews rejected their expected Messiah because He didn't fit their expectation, their definition of their Messiah. Jesus was in the world, but not of the world. He reframed everything from the perspective of the world of life and not the world of death. The clash of paradigms, the initial clash of Judaism and Christianity, accelerated by the pressure on the Jews by Rome, occurred between 30 and 165 at the death of Justin Martyr. Again, it is useful to understand the clash between Judaism and Christianity in terms of this clash of scientific paradigms. Practicing in different worlds, the two groups of scientists see different things when they look from the same point in the same direction. Both are looking at the world, and what they look at has not changed, but in some areas they see different things, and they see them in different relations to the other. So secondly, how does a new paradigm triumph over a prior paradigm? Kuhn calls it a conversion, believe it or not. He's talking science, and he calls it a conversion. Therefore, they can hope to communicate fully. One group or the other must experience the conversion that we have been calling a paradigm shift. A new, should be a space new, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with the new. That's why we must continually be evangelizing, sharing the gospel inside the church with ourselves, because we baptize our children as babies, and they must come to be evangelized so they can embrace the gospel themselves and understand what it is we're doing without just mimicking a paradigm. Oh, I've learned to cross myself 3 times. I've learned how to prostrate. I've learned when to stand and when to sit. Big deal! It's God that counts, and we got to come to turn aside and realize that I don't want to wait 38 years to meet Jesus when I've been in the church all my life. Now, I'm not being critical, please. Everyone must be converted. We all have to embrace, whether you call yourself a convert or whether you call yourself a cradle, we all have to embrace the gospel. That's what we're talking about. This paralytic had to embrace the gospel as he was hearing it for the first time for himself. The transfer of allegiance from paradigm to paradigm is a conversion experience that cannot be forced. John's Mystagogic class is caught in this clash of competing religious paradigms at the halfway point in history. Roman pressure will bring to an end the conversion of Jews to Christianity. Forced by Rome, Judaism retreated into its ethnic ghetto with an uneasy and not always peaceful coexistence with both Rome and the church. On the other hand, the church refused to retreat and abandon the conversion of non-Jews and suffered martyrdom for it. The miracle of Gentile conversion from paganism to Christianity ultimately led to the triumph of Christianity over paganism. Now, I've got just a couple more pages to wrap this up, but it's already 8 o'clock. You're pooped. This is heavy, so we'll just go ahead and take our break right now. We'll come back in a few minutes, finish this up, and let the lightning come in just a minute. Thank you. God bless you. The destruction of the 2.4 million Jews was not a punishment by God because they crucified Christ. History's got to get beyond that nonsense. God is not an angry God. He is rescuing us from a mousetrap that's going to go off. You're going to die if you stay in the wilderness. Get into the promised land. You don't want to go, you're going to die. You don't accept the Son, we're all going to die. It's a rescue out. We're not going to be spanked because we reject Jesus. We're just going to die. He's come to rescue us from death into life. Okay. Against the warning for the man to sin no more, lest a worse thing comes to you, takes on new significance when seen as a reference to Judaism as a whole. There is no compromise between the Mosaic paradigm, the Weltanschauung, the worldview, the perspective, the frame from within which Judaism saw and understood the world, and the paradigm of the Word who became flesh and dwelt among us. The warning not to lapse is a warning to Jewish Christians not to relapse into Judaism. Bowing to Roman pressure, their rabbis had expelled all Jewish Christians from the synagogues and by extension from the Jewish community. In order to remain in the Jewish community, remain a member of the synagogue, and by virtue of paying the Jewish tax, have immunity from Roman persecution, Jewish Christians must renounce Christ. Likewise, after 90 AD, the Gentile Christians faced torture and death for living like Jews, that is, only worshiping one God of the Jews. There were many syncretistic religions which borrowed some beliefs and practices from Christianity. Gentile converts could easily lapse into paganism, some of which incorporated aspects of Christianity. Therefore, the warning in 90 AD not to go and sin lest something worse befall you was to both Jewish and Gentile converts alike. See, you have been made well, sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. The hour is coming, and now is. In the first set of flashbacks, John has contrasted the crowd's enthusiasm based on miracles with genuine faith, and the verses are there in chapter 2 and chapter 4. With the healing of the paralytic, John begins a second set of flashbacks, going to be 9 of them together. From the perspective of 60 years after the resurrection, with this set of flashbacks, John makes explicit the difference between Moses and Jesus, between the synagogue and the church. Let me just do one thing real fast. There is the 9-dot problem that has 9 dots arranged thusly, 3 rows of 3. And the assignment is to connect all 9 dots without moving your pencil from the board. in straight lines. And so we're going to come and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and oops. We had 4 lines and we missed. So let's see if I got to make sure I do this one. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I got that one left out and that one left out. Here we go. So, that's Judaism, trying to figure out the dots. Here comes Christ. Got the same data, same set of story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You got the prophets. You got the Old Testament. You got all of the dots. Only Moses had connected them a certain way. Christ has come to fulfill the dots, come to fulfill it, but not the way you expect it to be fulfilled. It's new wine in a new wineskin because it's going to rip the old wineskin apart. So Christ comes and does this to it. And connects all 9 dots in 4 lines because he's not locked inside the box. If you don't learn anything else about the resurrection, it's that God doesn't stay in the box. I mean, Moses had his box, the Ark of the Covenant. We've got an empty tomb. The resurrection fulfills everything, but not the way we thought it was going to be fulfilled. If we can ever let God be God, then we won't waste 38 years sitting beside the pool waiting for God to do it our way. Okay, I'm getting excited. I'm sorry. Wow. This is life. Chapter 5, verse 16 now. For this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him. Now we've got it, don't we? There's a clash here. They're going to try to kill him because he clashes with Moses, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Then Jesus answered and said to them, most assuredly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do, for whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself does, and he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Most assuredly I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming, in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice, and come forth. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. I can of myself do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. Jesus follows the scene with Nicodemus back in chapter 3 with an extended discourse Likewise, an extended discourse follows the scene with the paralytic. The discourse that follows the healing is one of the most exalted in John. This Sabbath discourse anticipates themes that will be enlarged and expressed more fully in the Last Supper discourses of John chapter 14 and 17. This discourse, the Sabbath discourse, assumes a cultural literacy that 2,000 years later we no longer possess. Mark says Jesus was a carpenter. Matthew tells us he was a carpenter's son. Sons learned their father's trade. Like an apprentice, they learned by doing it the way their father taught them. Once the son has mastered the trade, it should not be possible to tell whether the father or his son had crafted an item, because the son had learned to make it the way he had seen his father do it. This is the carpenter's son speaking. Most assuredly, I say to you, the son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the father do. For whatever he does, the son also does in like manner. The keeping of the Sabbath is likewise invisible to us. The basis for the Sabbath is found in the fourth commandment. It's there out of the Old Testament. Chapter 20, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant or female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. That's the law. In the Synoptics, Jesus defends his breaking of the Sabbath on humanitarian grounds. It is good to help others even on the Sabbath. Then the Lord answered him and said, Hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? Then he answered them, saying, Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? Or Jesus defends himself with a theological argument that the priests are permitted to work on the Sabbath. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Note the above passage from Matthew goes on to state the thesis of John's Gospel. Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The argument made in this discourse in John is much more subtle. John's discourse approaches the issue of working on the Sabbath from the perspective of God. For Judaism, that God rested on the seventh day did not imply that God was a watchmaker God of deism who never worked again. That's not the Jewish position. Nor did it imply that God followed a human work week and never was at work on the Sabbath. In particular, as regards mankind, divine activity was visible in two ways. Men were born and men died. Mankind was born and died on the Sabbath. Since only God could give life and only God could deal with the fate of the dead in judgment, this meant God was active on the Sabbath day. In other words, the prohibition against working on the Sabbath was not a prohibition against God. There were certain prerogatives he had, one of which was life and death. The Jewish tractate Ta'anith, part of the Babylonian Talmud, states, Rabbi Yohanan said, These are three keys which the Holy One, blessed be He, meaning God, has not entrusted into the hands of any messenger, but keeps in His own hand. They are the keys of rain, the key of birth, and the key of the resurrection of the dead. The key of rain, for it is written in Deuteronomy, the Lord shall open unto thee his good treasure, the heaven to give thee rain. The key of birth, for it is written in Genesis, and God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her and opened her womb. And the key of resurrection of the dead is found in Ezekiel, and ye shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves. In the west they added another one for sustenance, but that's really included in the rain. Since it rained on the Sabbath, and people were born and died on the Sabbath, it was obvious within Judaism that God was active even on the Sabbath. This is the point. The Sabbath privilege of working on the Sabbath was reserved for God alone. For the Jews, the Sabbath privilege was peculiar to God, and no one was equal to God. That's why you didn't work on the Sabbath day. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? To whom will you liken me and make me equal and compare me, that we should be alike? O Lord God of hosts, who is mighty like you, O Lord? Your faithfulness also surrounds you. It is at this point the twin themes of being the carpenter's son and God's Sabbath privilege weave together. In claiming the right to work even as his Father worked, Jesus was claiming the divine prerogative for himself. I must work even as my Father works. My Father has been working unto now, and I have been working. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Then Jesus answered and said to them, Most assuredly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. That unique identification of sameness, of oneness. What the Father does, I'm doing. Father and Son. The carpenter and the carpenter's son. According to the rabbis, only God held the key of birth, life, and the key of resurrection and judgment. By doing what only God could do, heal on the Sabbath, Jesus had made himself equal with God. John makes this clear to his class. John also makes clear what God the Father is doing. God the Son is also still doing. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. In other words, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. The Father is at work in his creation, and so is the Son. The Son has come offering rescue from the world of death and restoration to the world of life to those willing to accept it. Rescue and restoration are twin sides of the same coin. Those rescued from death were now restored to the original purpose and the original goal of life, to become like God. It is the Son's work to rescue and restore. It was also the Son's task as a man to behave like God. Likewise, it is our work in becoming like God, that is, as men and women, to behave like God. That in so becoming, we will also become co-laborers in the rescue and restoration of all mankind. Most assuredly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. here already, now already, in this world of death already. Resurrection has come. This one who stands before us, this man speaking to us, is God in the flesh. He is life. He is resurrection. He has come to give us life now. He has come to rescue us from the world of death, that even now we can begin living in the world of the living. John's Mystagogic class, newly baptized and illuminated, knew firsthand what it meant to be made alive in Christ. They knew that the Sabbath, the seventh day of God's rest, was a prophecy fulfilled when the crucified Son lay in the tomb on the Sabbath day. This was the day God rested after He had done all things necessary to rescue mankind from the world of death. They knew Pascha, the eighth day of the new creation, had dawned. They had taken light from the light that is never overtaken by the night. Jesus had spoken about them and us when He said, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." We are the sheep Christ has rescued from the pit, from the world of death in which we were born. The Coptic non-canonical Gospel of Truth, written 60 years after John in 150 AD, in speaking of the shepherd who left the 99 sheep who were not lost to go search for that one, says, in one translation, "Even on the Sabbath he labored for the sheep which he had found fallen into the pit. He gave life to the sheep, having brought it up from the pit, in order that you might know interiorly, you, the sons of interior knowledge, what is the Sabbath, on which it is not fitting for salvation to be idle, in order that you may speak from the day from above, which has no night, and from the light which does not sink, because it is perfect. Say then from the heart that you are the perfect day, and in you dwells the light that does not fail." Or a second translation of the same passage, "He labored even on the Sabbath for the sheep, which he had found fallen into the pit. He saved the life of that sheep, bringing it up from the pit, in order that you may understand fully what that Sabbath is. You who possess full understanding, it is a day in which it is not fitting that salvation be idle, so that you may speak of that heavenly day which has no night, and of the sun which does not set, because it is perfect. Say then in your heart that you are this perfect day, and that in you the light which does not fail dwells." The heavenly day which has no night, that was in this passage, is a quotation from the Paschal hymn of Orthodox Christianity. "Come ye, take light from the light that is never overtaken by night. Come glorify Christ, risen from the dead." We've sung it at every Paschal service we've ever gone to. Even in later heretical documents, such as the Gospel of Truth, the Paschal language of the Apostolic Church survived for a time, even if the apostolic understanding of the resurrection did not. But what the heretics altered and discarded, the whole truth, the Church continues to proclaim. We have been begotten into the world of life, the kingdom of God. Christ rescues us from the pit of death, restores us to life as we now live in the light that is never overtaken by night. Make no mistake, at first glance, there are two... I lost my watch. I better not do that. We want to go home sometime tonight. So. Make no mistake. Moving on to the next passage. At first glance, there are two different understandings of judgment given into this passage. The first version is found in verses 21 through 25, is the resurrection and life now. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will. For the Father judges no one, and has committed all judgment to the Son, that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father. Most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Most assuredly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. One version of the resurrection. Second version begins in verse 26. For as the Father has life in himself, so he's granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment. Also because he is the Son of Man, do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice, and come forth, those who have done good to resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. I cannot of myself do nothing, as I hear I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. The first version speaks of the inbreaking of God into our lives now, while the second version speaks of the inbreaking of God in our lives as a future event. The contrast between the two versions reminds us of Matthew's version of the Sermon on the Mount, in which the pattern, "you have heard, but I say to you," is repeated 6 times. You have heard, and he quotes Moses, "but I say." In each instance, Jesus reminds the Jews of the common Jewish belief, to which he, Jesus, then gives an alternative understanding. What John is doing is very similar to what Matthew does. John is contrasting the common Jewish belief, the second version, with Jesus' alternative version, the first one that is given. While Matthew gives the Jewish version first, before giving it the alternative from Christ, John gives the alternative view of Christ first. Time will not allow us to explore Jewish eschatological thinking, the messianic end of time. Those wishing to explore the subject will find easily accessible articles at JewishEncyclopedia.com and JewishVirtualLibrary.org. Let it suffice to say that all eschatological systems think only in terms of linear time, past, present, and future. According to these eschatological systems, there is this present world, and there is a world to come. The second version, found in John 5:26 and 30, is a brief summary of the common Jewish belief in the end-time resurrection and judgment of the dead. In Jewish thought, the Son of Man was an eschatological figure ushering in the day of the Lord with its general resurrection and judgment, which is what was just described in that second version. The second version is the "you have heard it said," if you will, referring to the version common among the Jews. What the Jews expect God to do in the future, at the end of time, the "you have heard it said," is redefined by the first version, "but I say unto you" pattern. The first version is from the perspective of the kingdom of God and the world of life, which is not based on, contained within, or restricted by space and time. The kingdom of God is without time. It is timeless. The second version is from the perspective of this world, a world of linear space and time. It is a version of judgment based on what is good or evil, but good or evil according to whom? What is good or evil to a Jew, to a Christian, to a Muslim, to a pagan, to a Hindu, to a Buddhist, to a Marxist, in a democracy, Good and evil are relative terms to human culture. How does God judge that? Human laws regulate our behavior within families, tribes, and nations. Punishment is used to enforce compliance with the rules. Rules do not create life. Rules do not give life. They reduce our exposure to risk. They keep us safe. But they don't give life. They try to protect life. However, not all obedience to the rules results in safety, protection, and blessedness. Nor does all disobedience result in punishment. On a human level, we think on this linear level, and so what we didn't receive in this life, we will receive in the next life. I will get my reward. And those who have done good will receive it. And I know that person over there, he died and he was evil. And I bet you he's going to burn in hell. That's a human approach to judgment on a linear basis. Because he didn't get it on this life, he'll get it in the next life. And those who receive evil, did evil, will receive damnation. The second version is based on linear thinking within a visible space-time world. It is unaware that Adam and Eve chose death over life, and that all of us are now born and live within a world of death. We are surrounded by death. Death is at work in us. We have mortal, deathly bodies. What we call life is actually living in death. It didn't matter whether you were good or evil, rich or poor, black or white. If you were on the Titanic, it didn't make it into a lifeboat, you died. Everyone who ever lived in the world of death is dead. Everyone now living in the world of death is going to die. We are on the Titanic. Each of us is going to die. Death is the judgment. Death is inbuilt in the world of death. It is the judgment for what Adam and Eve chose. They chose it. The God who is the judge in end-time versions is the Father the Son sees working now. The God who will raise the dead in end-time versions is the Father who raises the dead and gives life to them now. Even so, the Son gives life now to whom He will. We are the walking dead, and those who hear His words and believe are made alive now. We begin living in the kingdom of God now. As perfect people? No. We are where Adam and Eve were before they chose death. We are there in the beginning, now having the opportunity to live in accordance with the image of God we carry within us. We were created in the image and with the task of becoming like the image of God within us. The image and likeness of God. Our behavior is supposed to be like the image of God within us. And it isn't. And so Christ has come to rescue us out of the life of death so that now where Adam and Eve once were, we now are, and by His grace in our lives have been born again, have been begotten from above, to now begin to walk with Him in the cool of the evening, in our morning prayers, all the days of our lives, and begin to behave the way God behaves towards each other, towards one another. We begin to approximate. We begin to be like the image of God we carry within us. So we're not resurrected in perfection. We are rescued and restored to where Adam and Eve were before they chose to live in the world of death. The resurrection is the judgment of the world. The world of death has been judged by the Son's trampling down death by death and bestowing life to those willing to receive it. The resurrection is the 8th day of creation. This is the eschatological day of the Lord. It is called in Greek what the Kyriaki, the day of the Lord's day. Here already, now already, the eschatological day of the Lord has occurred. For the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice. It says in the second version, and that has now become, I say to you, the hour is coming and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. That's the Christian version to the Jewish version. An ontological paradigm shift has occurred. We have passed from death into life. Today is the day of resurrection. O nations, let us shine forth. For the Pascha is the Pascha of the Lord, in that Christ did make us pass from death to life, from earth to heaven. Let us cleanse our senses, that we may behold Christ shining like lightning, with the unapproachable light of resurrection, that we may hear him say openly, rejoice. Let the heavens rejoice, and the earth be glad, as is meet, and let the whole world, visible and invisible, feast, for Christ has risen to everlasting joy. The third day resurrection is the eighth day of creation. It is the day of the Lord, the Kyriaki, the Lord's day. It is the day without sunset, without night. In truth, how noble is this radiant and all festal night of salvation. For it proceeds the proclamation of the light-bearing day of resurrection, in which the timeless light did shine forth bodily from the grave. Here already, now already, the third day resurrection is the eighth day of creation. Verily this day, which is called holy, is the first day among Sabbaths, their King and Lord. It is the feast of feasts, the season of seasons. Come, let us on this famous day of resurrection participate in the kingdom of Christ and in the new fruit of the vine, which is for divine rejoicing. Here already, now already, on the eighth day of creation, the kingdom has come. There is a new heaven and a new earth and a new Jerusalem, the church. Shine, shine, O New Jerusalem, for the glory of the Lord has risen upon thee. Rejoice and exult now, O Zion, and thou, O pure one, Theotokos, rejoice in the resurrection of your Son. In the resurrection of Christ, the kingdom has come. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. The day of the new creation has dawned, a day which knows no night. O Christ, the perfect, most exalted Pascha, O wisdom of God, his word and his power, grant us that we may partake of thee more perfectly in thy kingdom's day, which sets not. The third day resurrection is the eighth day of creation. Hades is despoiled. Adam is recalled from the dead. The curse is made void. Eve is set free. Death is slain, and we are endowed with life. Adam's paradigm shift to death has been reversed by Christ's paradigm shift to life. Christ has opened unto us the gates of paradise. We now stand where Adam and Eve once stood, in paradise, with the choice between life and death. The eschatological day of the Lord has come. The eschatological day of the Lord is here. Here already, now already, the kingdom has come. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Most assuredly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Amen. Okay, let me take care of one little bit of business. I had a www up here a while ago. That's the website, but you can't send an email with the www in it, so it would have to be Ezra at that to get it there. And then secondly, next week is the 18th. That will be our last class on Monday night in this month, because the next one's Christmas and the one after that is New Year's. So next week is our last one until we take 2 weeks off, and we'll come back then on January the 8th, I think it'll be. So thank you for coming tonight, a huge crowd. I look forward to seeing you next week as we prepare for Christmas. Thank you. If you didn't check off the roll, please do on your way out so we know that you were here.